Close your eyes and picture a caveman. Dark cave, flickering torch, a family huddled together, shivering, waiting out the ice age in the dirt and the dark. Now forget that image, because it's almost entirely wrong. For over 150 years, this is the picture museums, cartoons, and textbooks gave us. But modern archaeology tells a very different story about where Ice Age humans actually slept, ate, and survived. And it's far stranger and smarter than the myth. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what an Ice Age home really looked like, why deep caves were actually one of the most dangerous places you could live, and what people were really doing in those famous painted caves if they weren't living in them. Here's the problem with deep caves. They're cold, pitch black, often flooded, and have almost no airflow. They're also rare. Most landscapes in Ice Age Europe simply didn't have usable caves nearby. And the caves that did exist were often already occupied by cave bears, cave lions, and cave hyenas, animals far more dangerous than anything in a modern nature documentary. So why do we call them cavemen at all? Because caves are extremely good at preserving evidence. Open-air campsites get washed away, built over, or scattered by weather over tens of thousands of years. Caves protect bones, tools, and ash exactly where they were left. We don't think people mostly lived in caves. We think caves are just where the evidence survived. Instead of deep caves, people overwhelmingly favored rock shelters, shallow overhangs cut into cliffs and riverbanks, open to fresh air and daylight, but protected from rain, wind, and snow by the rock above. Picture a curving wall of limestone, leaning out over a valley, with a wide, flat floor beneath it, and a river just a short walk away. That's the real Ice Age address. Not a tunnel into darkness, but a ledge with a view. And they didn't just sit there passively, waiting for the weather to pass. They engineered these spaces, season after season, generation after generation, the way we might renovate a house we plan to keep living in. The first thing they did was seal the gap. They draped large animal hides, bison, reindeer, mammoth, across the open front of the overhang, like a curtain wall hung from the rock itself. That single barrier could cut wind speed dramatically, turning a howling, exposed ledge into something closer to a sealed room. Inside that outer shell, they built a second layer, smaller tent-like structures made from wooden poles, lashed together and covered in sewn hide. A shelter inside a shelter. Excavators have found the post holes, small round impressions punched into ancient dirt floors, marking exactly where those poles once stood, thousands of years after the wood itself rotted away. At the center of it all, a hearth. Not a campfire as an afterthought, but the engineering core of the whole structure. The overhang above and the hide walls around it weren't just blocking the cold. They were reflecting the fire's heat and light back into the living space, turning the rock shelter into a kind of natural amplifier. Sit close enough, and the same flame that cooked your dinner also warmed the wall behind your back. And that fire did more than heat the room. Around 30,000 years ago, people figured out how to boil food using nothing but stones. They'd heat rocks in the hearth until they were almost too hot to touch, then drop them straight into a skin or bark container filled with water and plant material. The water would bubble and steam from the heated stones alone. It's a strange image, boiling soup without a single metal pot anywhere in sight. But the cracked, heat-shattered rocks scattered around Ice Age hearths are the leftover evidence of exactly that process. Some shelters went even further. In Siberia, archaeologists uncovered something close to architecture, a hut built almost entirely out of mammoth bones. Long curved tusks were stood up and arched together to form roof supports, essentially flying buttresses made of ivory. Skulls and heavy thigh bones were stacked and wedged into the walls, creating something solid enough to block wind and snow on its own. No cave required. Inside, there wasn't just one hearth, but several small ones, spaced out across the floor, enough to suggest more than one family living and sleeping under that single bone roof at the same time. And this wasn't only about staying warm. At one ancient lakeshore site, archaeologists found something almost impossibly delicate to have survived this long: bedding. Not bones, not stone tools, actual woven plant matter, laid out in a careful ring around a central hearth. On one side, a clean, debris-free area meant for sleeping. On the other, separate zones, clearly used for different jobs. One for cooking and food preparation, another scattered with stone flakes from tool repair, another stained and worn from working hides into clothing. None of this equipment lasted forever either. Stone tools chipped, dulled, and snapped constantly. So part of ordinary life inside the shelter was simply upkeep, resharpening blades, refitting them onto wooden or bone handles, mixing tree resin and ash into a kind of natural glue, strong enough to hold a stone point onto a spear shaft under real hunting pressure. By the time true winter closed in, someone was probably sewing too. Eyed needles carved from bone let people stitch hides into fitted clothing rather than simply wrapping loose skins around themselves. The difference between barely surviving an Ice Age winter and actually staying warm through one. In other words, this wasn't a random pile of people huddled together in the dark, the way the old Caveman image suggests. It was a household with rooms, before anyone had ever built a wall, a sleeping area, a kitchen, a workshop, all arranged around one fire, all engineered with intention, tens of thousands of years before the first brick was ever laid. If people weren't living deep in caves, why are the most famous Ice Age sites, Lascaux, Chauvet, caves at all? Because that's exactly where they chose to make art. Walk past the entrance zone, where ash, food scraps, and broken tools pile up near daylight, and keep going past the point where natural light runs out completely. That's where the paintings begin. Chauvet Cave, in southern France, holds some of the oldest paintings on Earth: lions stalking in a pack, rhinos rendered in confident, sweeping lines, horses that seem to move across the rock by torchlight. At Lascaux, a single chamber holds a procession of bulls, each one larger than a person, painted with such anatomical precision that modern biologists can look at a reindeer's coat in the image and tell you, just from the texture of the fur, roughly what month it was painted. That precision wasn't accidental, and neither was the location. Archaeologists have noticed a clear pattern. The deeper into a cave system you travel, the more art you find, and the less ordinary daily life you find. Near the entrance, there's evidence of people simply living. Push further into the dark zone, and that debris thins out almost completely, replaced by paintings, hand stencils, and sometimes nothing but a single set of footprints, pressed into soft clay and never disturbed again, some belonging to children, deliberately led toward the most decorated chambers. Combined with paintings placed in chambers that require crawling or squeezing through narrow passages just to reach them, the picture that emerges isn't of a home, it's of a destination, somewhere people travel to on purpose, for something significant enough to justify the difficulty of getting there. That's why most archaeologists now think these chambers were reserved for something deliberate. Ritual, the passing down of knowledge, possibly rites of passage. Not everyday living, but closer to a pilgrimage. A room the Ice Age built not for shelter, but for meaning. So the real Ice Age home wasn't a dark cave. It was a carefully engineered rock shelter, with hide walls, internal tents, a central hearth, and even designated rooms. The caves themselves weren't houses. They were something closer to a cathedral, a place people went to, not a place they lived. If this completely changed how you picture the Ice Age, subscribe for more documentaries like this. And tell me in the comments, what surprised you the most?